There's a German comedian in the UK called Henning Venn. Being a German comedian in the UK sounds like both an oxymoron and a very tough thing to be. But he tells this joke, which I quite like. A British couple decide to adopt a German baby. They raise him for years. However, they begin to get worried because he never speaks, and they believe that he must therefore be mentally handicapped. They take him to therapy, they take him to doctors, none of which seems to help. It's all fruitless. The kid gets to 8 years old, and he hasn't said a word, and they give him a strudel. And suddenly, out of nowhere, he says, "This is a little tepid." His parents are, of course, shocked that he's suddenly speaking. "Wolfgang, why have you never spoken before?" To which the child replies, "Up until now, everything had been satisfactory." I relay this, though I don't tell it as well as him, because this game, Orwell, spelled out in leet speak, treads similar ground to the other 1984 inspired game that I recently reviewed. That game was just bad, in my opinion. This one, however, is apparently German and also, sadly, merely satisfactory. Which is a shame, because I really wanted to like this one. It's a great idea, presented in a somewhat disturbing way, perhaps a little tone deaf here and there, even for me, and with a simple system at its core, which nonetheless ends up suffering from Luke Crane syndrome. Luke Crane syndrome is where you have a perfectly cromulent, simple, easy to understand system, and then you make it impenetrable and complex by adding all manner of other subsystems and interpretations and squirreling them away in obscure paragraphs in your book. So yeah. So this is called Orwell, but it's spelled out in NetSpeak, and it's actually by Disoriented Ranger Publishing, not Eroded Restraining Publishing, which is just one additional aspect of confusion to go on here. They do not make themselves easy to find between that and a seeming mostly repulsion for social media or corporate internet, as I believe they style it, which is fine and dandy, in so much as it's fine and dandy. This takes more of what you might call a radical centrist approach against the background of a sort of omni-shambles in society that's completely broken down in this world, and the worst fears of both wings of political discourse that go on at the moment, though wings probably isn't exactly correct. So, environmental disaster, tick, runaway capitalism, tick, massive amounts of what amounts to paedophilia and chemical castration of the populace, all of that kind of thing, tick. So it's a real mix of everyone's worst interpretations of how the future is going to go, with a mixture of both, sane and accurate fears and insane and inaccurate fears for the future. In this dystopia, everything is wired up and wired together. There is a social credit system in place that gamifies social enforcement and good behaviour. So, while this is satire in a lot of ways, it is barely satire, because in many ways it also reflects the real world. So what do you play in this? Well, this is where it gets weird, and where I think it might start losing people, because it doesn't sound particularly appealing. But then what dystopian games do, really. Almost everyone is essentially a child, though they might be a particularly old child, because the general population is blanket kept on puberty blockers, with only a very few who properly serve the party being allowed to have puberty and therefore choose a gender. You might have a problematic degree of identification with your gender, one way or the other. That's also a thing. But by and large, everyone is a sort of stunted, slightly chubby little child. You know, the older men who had already gone through puberty, they were turned into a slave labour force for the society as a whole. But everyone is so racially mixed that anybody could be said to be a cis white male at any point, and that's basically like thought criminal. Everyone and everything is monitored and policed, but also within this world, the law of unintended consequences is very much sharply in focus. For example, to take just one example from the book, food is now vood because it's absolutely all vegan with no exceptions. And because everything is wired together with the Internet of Things, if you happen to enjoy a nice beef burger, should you somehow be able to get hold of one, the moment you took a shit, your Japanese-style toilet would analyse your poop and inform Central Command that you had eaten animal flesh, and then you would be in severe trouble, to say the least. However, there are exceptions. The toilets do not screen for human DNA. So, if you engage in cannibalism, as apparently happens with some regularity in the setting, then you're not going to be informed on. So, the safest and only way to really eat meat is to eat human meat, should you wish to. So, like I say, unintended consequences is sharply in focus, which is fascinating. System's pretty simple. Usually, you as a player are going to be rolling 3 dice, typically perhaps 2d12 and 1d10. Usually, you put the rightmost one aside as your optional die that you can then buy to add on to your score. The remaining ones are the lead die, which determines your success failure with added on other factors, and your secondary die, which adds if you roll a double, or otherwise has effects on play due to the other rules, like blowback or things like that. You also have a trading currency of pennies, which you can trade in for narrative control of some sort. Pennies are used as a sort of currency between the players and the games master, ramping up what the games master does, so as a DM district master, or allowing the players to survive or do cool shit or invoke things, improve their characters in some way. All of that sort of thing. So this creates a slightly confusing ecosystem of pennies, anger, which is another important trait that fluctuates up and down. You can spend anger points to do more damage, things like that. And other traits, slots in particular, like the game structure is determined by these slots that you get, and these slots are improved skills, gadgets, wounds, other aspects and things that occur during play, and once all your slots are filled up, you sort of bring that particular segment of the game to a close once everyone's filled all their slots, and then you move on to the next one. It's confusing, and I'm still not sure that I got it right during my little playtests that I've done. It could do with some more examples and hand-holding, which sounds ridiculous when you read through the book, because the majority of it seems to be rules application, subsystems, and so on, with relatively scant elements of game building, setting, all of that sort of thing. And there are a lot of diagrams, and yet I came away not really particularly understanding how anything worked. And as a games master with some experience, that's a little bit distressing, especially since I would have to guide any new players through the game. My inability to relatively easily grasp what's going on, how the subsystems work, and everything in the game. That's a problem, and maybe some of that comes down to translation from German to English. It is a theme that I've tended to see in translated games, but I've only attempted translations a couple of times, and it hasn't economically been worth it. So maybe I'm not the right person to ask here, but maybe that's it, or maybe it's just the way the German language works, and then it doesn't necessarily work when moved across particularly. I don't know, but yeah, I found it difficult and somewhat impenetrable because it is constantly introducing new concepts, and because that base relatively simple system is built upon with so many subsystems and procedures that it gets confusing. Just the sheer amount of terminology that's thrown at you gets quite confusing. This is a problem a lot of relatively simple narrative type games tend to have. They draw you in with their promise of quick, simple, easy to understand game rules, and then hit you with a whole bunch of different subsystems and so on, all of which are woven together so that it's harder to improvise or to change rules, because they can just go off on one and do unexpected things. More unintended consequences, I suppose. I mean, you can't... Plus the setting is difficult to explain. I did my best earlier on, but it's not like Paranoia, which is very easy to explain as a sort of dystopia. You're a troubleshooter. You hunt down commies, mutants, and traitors who are members of secret societies. You're a mutant and a traitor and a member of a secret society, and away you go. That's relatively easy. Perhaps it doesn't help that we don't have that many cultural touchstones for these kind of things anymore. At least not of the same kind of character as the 1970s and 80s dystopias, and 60s as well, I suppose, late 60s. So yeah, it can be a little difficult to get people to get a hang on what the setting is exactly, or to want to play it. I think might be quite difficult. It uses TV and show terminology, which has become a bit of a bugbear for me lately. So you've got seasons and episodes, and combats and so on are broken down into shots, so it's kind of deliberately using a cinematic or sort of teleplay style format. Yeah, I'm not a fan, really. I've become increasingly less of a fan over time of that sort of thing. I mean, it's okay. It's just that it bugs me. It bugs me more when people describe their players as their cast, I think. There's some coloured text throughout the book, some little highlights of colour, which is quite effective against the sort of more monochrome background, except where yellow is used, where it is practically unreadable. Unfortunately, could have done with a little outline or shadow or something wherever you were using a lighter colour. So what we have at the end of the day is an interesting game that I really wanted to like more than I ended up liking, that is presented in a very confusing fashion and has the classic problems of narrative systems often, where they get bogged down by special cases and jargon and so on that make it quite a high maintenance system, more so than a lot of more, on the face of it, complex systems. And there's a lot of jargon. Style-wise, I love the world as it's presented. Might have worked better as a fiction book. I don't know. Some of the illustrations and so on of the puberty arrested citizens of this world remind me of the Atom Kinder by brain fart guy who designed Alien. Yeah. Anyway, they remind me of those a bit. There's also a touch of the Euro comics style to it here. So I love that. The layout is good, relatively simple, but has little touches of design to its tables and explanations, which elevate it from my other recent complaints about layouts. And reasonable but not overbearing use of fonts, textures, halftones, that sort of thing. So that's good. So overall, I would give it a star rating of 4. It's pretty, the art is good, the layout is good, the idea of including the charts and so on is great, but they tend to be a bit more intimidating than helpful necessarily. So substance wise, a great deal of this, as I say, possibly the majority of it, is rules and tables and subsystems and structures. While you get the game background, it is overwhelmed by the systems that you find instead, which are not particularly well explained, unfortunately, amongst other issues. So it's just slightly unnecessarily complex, and it could have gone in a bit more on the world with more of a player's eye view. What is life like in this world on a day-to-day basis. Instead we get more sort of broad sweeping ideas of what the world is like, leaving it undefined-ish in the more personal interactions, which is fine, in so much as it's fine because you want to make the game your own, but still just somewhat felt lacking. So in terms of substance, a high 2 perhaps. So style 4, substance 2, 6 out of 10, 3 out of 5. So satisfactory, but I wanted something more. And it's even possible I'm being slightly overgenerous because the other Orwell-inspired game was such a disappointment. Worth it for the world building, but that's such a relatively small amount of the book that I don't know. It's a curiosity, and I wanted to like it, but the Luke Crane syndrome really gets in the way and stops me enjoying it as much as I otherwise would. Probably get around to playing it on Grim Game at some point, so you can see how it actually works in play at some point in the probably mid to distant future. Zang.
In the grim, dark depths of a grim, dark mine, there's a grim, dark man with a grim, dark mind, and his grim, dark pen spends its grim, dark time scratching grim, dark tales for his grim, dark kind.
Word to your mom, came to drop